Welcome back, deep divers. Today, today we're diving into some fascinating and maybe a little controversial social commentary. We've got a stack of threads from this guy, Henry Madison. He was big on, well back on Twitter, all about the downsides of our hyper-connected world, particularly in light of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff, really. Madison doesn't shy away from challenging conventional wisdom, especially when it comes to our assumptions about social connection and how much we really need it.
Right. Like, get this, the guy pretty much avoided COVID altogether. Not by hiding away, but by being super deliberate about his social interactions.
hmm
He actually calls that intense need for constant connection many people feel a form of violence.
Whoa, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a provocative statement for sure. But when you dig into his reasoning, it becomes clear he's getting at something deeper. It's not about being antisocial, but rather about questioning this idea that we need to be on all the time, constantly seeking validation from others. He argues that this pressure is often more about conformity than genuine well-being, especially in our always connected digital age.
So instead of asking, are we having fun yet? We should be asking, why do we feel the need to prove we are?
Exactly. And this is where Madison's own experience during the pandemic becomes really insightful. He talks about how he still maintained relationships with friends and family, but didn't feel that same pull to be constantly socializing that many others were describing. It made him wonder, what is this deep-seated need we have for constant connection, and is it truly serving us?
It's like he's saying the pandemic forced us into this unexpected social experiment, one that revealed just how reliant we've become on external validation.
Precisely. And you see this idea reflected in a lot of Madison's writing, particularly when he delves into social media. He compares it to high school life scaled up to all of life, this constant seeking of validation and measuring ourselves against others.
Ouch. High school life scaled up.
Yeah.
We've all been teenagers. That stings. But yeah, I see what he means. It's easy to get caught in that trap of comparison, especially when you're bombarded with curated versions of other people's lives.
Exactly. And for Madison, this all ties back to his belief about the purpose of socialization. He argues that as we mature, we should become less reliant on external validation and more comfortable with who we are, needing others less, not more.
That feels counterintuitive, though, doesn't it? Don't we always hear about how crucial strong social connections are for our well-being? So much emphasis on community, especially in times of crisis.
You're right, it does go against the grain of a lot of what we hear. But Madison would argue that true strength comes from within. He's not advocating for isolation, but rather a shift in focus, from seeking validation outwards to cultivating a deeper understanding of ourselves. It's about recognizing that relying less on others can actually be a sign of personal growth, not a weakness.
Okay, so I see where he's coming from with that. But then how does he square that with this whole idea of the pandemic forcing a reset on our social lives?
Well, he sees it as a double-edged sword. On one hand, it disrupted the status quo and exposed the fragility of a society that thrives on external validation. But on the other hand, it created a space for reflection, for questioning our priorities and potentially redefining what truly matters.
So instead of rushing back to normal, maybe we should be asking ourselves if that's what we really want.
Precisely. And this is where Madison's insights on the relationship between catastrophe and change come into play. He argues that throughout history, major upheavals have often been catalysts for profound societal shifts.
He uses the example of those areas of natural beauty, the AONBs in the UK, right?
Exactly. Created in 1945 after a string of global catastrophes, World War I, the Spanish flu, World War II, they represent this yearning for a simpler life, a return to nature and beauty after immense hardship.
It makes you wonder if that same yearning is bubbling beneath the surface now after the pandemic. Is this our generation's AONB moment, so to speak?
It's a fascinating question, isn't it? And it leads us right to the heart of Madison's argument, that maybe, just maybe, this hypersociality isn't serving us as well as we think it is.
And maybe it's time we explore that idea a bit further, which is precisely what we're going to do when we come back from Trail Tao. Part 2 of our deep dive into the intriguing and often contradictory ideas of Henry Madison. Don't go anywhere. You know, it's funny, before we started this deep dive, the whole idea of needing others less felt almost wrong, like some sort of social taboo.
Yeah.
But the more we unpack these Madison threads, the more it makes you think, you know?
It definitely challenges the usual narratives. And it gets even more interesting when we look at how Madison connects this idea of hypersociality to our modern obsession with travel. He's not exactly praising our constant need to jet set around the globe.
Yeah, he practically calls travel a desperate search for something we can't quite grasp. What's that all about? Is he suggesting we all just stay home and stare at the walls?
Not quite. It's more nuanced than that. Madison argues that much of modern travel is still stuck in this old mindset of conquering space, checking destinations off a list, collecting experiences as if they were
Like
souvenirs.
the little trinkets.
Exactly. Instead, he urges a shift from space to place, really understanding and appreciating the environments we inhabit, both physically and culturally.
So trade the selfie stick for a deeper connection to wherever we are. Got it. But isn't that going a bit far? Not everyone's trying to be Indiana Jones or anything, but travel can be about experiencing new cultures, broadening our perspective.
Absolutely. But Madison would argue that those benefits are often overshadowed by our desire for novelty and escape. He sees this constant need to be elsewhere as a symptom of our discomfort with the present moment, a restlessness that prevents us from truly appreciating what's right in front of us.
Okay, I'm starting to see the thread he's weaving here. How our need for outward validation, whether it's through social media or globetrotting, might actually be holding us back from deeper fulfillment.
Exactly, and this leads us to another one of Madison's thought-provoking ideas. His observation that societies are created by a single mechanism, status.
Now that sounds a bit like a sweeping generalization, doesn't it? Like saying the only reason we form communities is to climb some invisible ladder.
It does sound reductive at first glance, but Madison isn't saying status is the only factor, but rather that it's a powerful driving force behind much of our social behavior, often operating on a subconscious level. This idea that we're constantly engaged in a subtle dance of one-upmanship, whether it's through our possessions, achievements, or even our opinions.
Okay, I need an example here. How does this whole status mechanism actually play out in everyday life?
Well, Madison tells this anecdote about a friend who was super excited about buying an electric car. Big step for the environment, right? The friend was thrilled and wanted to share his excitement online.
Seems harmless enough. What could go wrong with a little eco-conscious bragging?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But here's where it gets really interesting. Instead of being met with congratulations, the friend was bombarded with negativity, even from close friends. Suddenly, everyone was a climate change expert, throwing all these anti-EV arguments his way.
Wow, talk about taking things personally. Maybe they were all secretly jealous.
That's precisely Madison's point. He argues that these kinds of reactions often stem from our deeply ingrained need to maintain our position within the social hierarchy. When someone does something that we perceive, even subconsciously, as challenging that hierarchy, it can trigger a defensive response.
So it wasn't about the car itself, but about what it represented in terms of status. Like, oh, you're so environmentally conscious now, driving your fancy electric car.
Exactly. And Madison suggests this dynamic plays out in countless ways throughout society, often with harmful consequences. He even uses the example of climate change denial itself, arguing that some people cling to those beliefs not out of genuine conviction, but because aligning with a particular tribe gives them a sense of belonging and security.
It's like they'd rather be part of a group, even one that might be factually inaccurate, than risk social isolation by questioning the status quo.
Precisely. And this is where Madison's ideas become really crucial for understanding how we navigate a world overflowing with information and increasingly polarized opinions.
So, are we doomed to be forever trapped in this status-obsessed cycle, constantly seeking validation from others? Is there even a way to opt out? It's almost like we're hardwired for that, to seek belonging, even if it means sacrificing some of our individuality in the process. It makes you wonder, can we break free from that at all? Or are we destined to forever be vying for a spot on that social ladder?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think Madison would argue that, yes, we can break free, but it requires a conscious effort to challenge those deeply ingrained patterns of seeking external validation.
Yeah, unlearning that need for approval.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the pull of the status game and making a choice to opt out, or at least to play by our own rules, so to speak.
So not necessarily becoming hermits and renouncing all worldly possessions, but just more like choosing where we want to direct our energy.
Right, right. And that's where Madison's argument about the potential of the pandemic as a turning point becomes really interesting. He suggests that this global shakeup, as disruptive and difficult as it was, also presented an opportunity, a chance to reassess our priorities, to step off that relentless treadmill of social comparison, and really redefine what truly matters.
Like a global pause button. It forced us to sit with ourselves, for better or worse. And maybe in that space we glimpsed something different, a different way of being, maybe.
Exactly, and that's what he's getting at with his idea of needing others less, not more. It's not about becoming antisocial, it's about cultivating a deeper sense of self-reliance. Finding that strength and fulfillment from within, rather than constantly seeking it from external sources.
Which, let's be honest, is easier said than done. We live in a world that's just saturated with these messages telling us we need more, do more, be more. How do we even begin to shift that mindset?
It starts with awareness. You know, just by recognizing those forces at play, the pull of status, the allure of external validation, we can begin to make more conscious choices. It's about questioning our motivations.
Right.
Why do we feel the need to buy certain things, travel to certain places, or even just present ourselves in a certain way? Is it truly driven by our own values and desires, or are we simply responding to these societal pressures?
It's about becoming more intentional, right, with our choices both big and small, tuning out that chorus of shoulds and really honing in on what feels true for us as individuals.
Precisely. And that's where I think Madison's message really resonates, you know? In a world that often feels overwhelming, he reminds us that true fulfillment, it doesn't come from chasing external validation, but from cultivating that strong sense of self and finding contentment from within.
It's a powerful message and one that certainly gives us a lot to ponder. I don't know about you, but this deep dive has left me feeling both challenged and strangely hopeful. Challenged to examine my own relationship with social connection and status, but also hopeful that maybe, just maybe, there's a different way to move through the world. One that's less about proving ourselves and more about embracing our own unique paths.
Beautifully said. And ultimately, isn't that what it's all about? Finding our own unique paths to meaning and connection in a world that often tries to tell us there's only one right way to be.
I think so. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those big questions. This has been The Deep Dive, and we'll catch you next time for another exploration of the ideas shaping our world. Until then, keep asking those tough questions and exploring those less traveled paths.